أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. قل إن صلاتي ونسكي ومحياي ومماتي لله رب العالمين. This is the 162nd verse of the 6th chapter of the Quran, Surah An'am. Its translation is as follows. Say, my prayers and sacrifice, my life and death are all for God, Lord of the worlds. What do these words mean? In summary, God is instructing the Prophet, peace be upon him, and all his followers to dedicate their prayers, rituals of worship, living and dying strictly for him. More specifically, he is referring to the ritual of sacrificing an animal during the pilgrimage to Mecca during Hajj. He is rebuking the practices of the Quraysh who would, even when acknowledging the Kaaba to be the house of Allah, make their sacrifice to an idol or an intermediary during their pilgrimage to it. So what's the context of this revelation? This verse is the last portion of Surah An'am, which was likely revealed as a whole in one setting in between the 5th and 10th year of prophethood, when the Prophet was still in Mecca. Being a Meccan surah, its focus is to clarify the aqidah or core beliefs of Islam. It expounds on the oneness of God, commands the rejection of idols, instills the belief in the last day with divine reward and punishment, and encourages obedience to God's law. So that's the context. But it can be helpful to see where a verse has been placed in the Quran and how it flows with the verses surrounding it. As previously mentioned, verse 162 is at the end of Surah An'am, a chapter about core Islamic beliefs, specifically focusing on the unique lordship of Allah over all of creation and our submission to Him in faith, worship, and law. It is part of the last verses of the surah, which beautifully summarize and distill the message of the whole surah. These last verses talk about being guided by the Lord to the truth, the way of Ibrahim, alayhi salam, or Abraham, who rejected all falsehood. These verses insist that everything of ours is for Allah, and that we should be eager to be the first to submit to Him. And they emphasize rejection of any Lord except Him, as He alone creates and controls everything. So what are some themes that can be taken from this verse? There are many, but here are a few. Firstly, the verse demands a rejection of false authority. Allah teaches us that ultimate obedience is for the one who is worthy of it, the creator of the universe. If one is not the creator, they are not qualified to be ultimately obeyed, and are incapable of independently making laws. This means that any law, or any obedience that contradicts obedience to the Almighty, is not worthy and immoral to obey. The second theme that flows from the first is to walk the talk. Islamic theology is not theoretical. It's not something to be discussed in textbooks or debated in philosophy classes. Rather, it is linked to the lived experiences of the community, not just in how we worship, but also in how we live our life and how we deal with the reality of death. And this brings us to the third theme, which is that of total commitment. What is meant by this is that faith has consequences, not just in our personal worship or rituals, but in the issues that actually affect our life and our death. These are issues like, how do we make and spend our money? How do we build loving relationships, build families, socialize constructively, and build community? How do we construct a collective? What does God have to tell us about building a society, or making a just political, economic, or judicial system? Another emphasis of this ayah is the consistency in the message of God. The message of Islam is not new. It was the message of Abraham and all the prophets. The Quran reforms the previous traditions. It is not new. It is not an invention in theology. The final theme we will discuss is the theme of spirituality. The verse's command, or this verse in particular, commands the total surrender of the ego in front of God. It demands you empty yourself of any other commitment, even the one to yourself. God is exhorting us to be filled with contentment with the will of Allah, to be filled with reverence for His commands, and to be filled with a love for remembering and worshipping Him. This is natural, as we recognize that it is God who created and who sustains and nourishes us. No one else has done that. The mystic scholar and poet Rashiduddin Maibudi, when commenting on this verse, said the one who internalizes its command becomes, quote, alone to the creatures, a stranger to oneself, at ease from attachment, at rest with the real. To explain this, alone to the others because you are at the service of the people. A stranger to oneself as you have escaped the grip of your own ego. At ease from attachment as you are liberated from the chains of earthly desire. And at rest with the real, as you find your joy and contentment with the remembrance and obedience to God.